January 4th, 1945. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, Versailles. Dwight Eisenhower's Chief of Staff, General Walter Bedell Smith, walked into Eisenhower's office carrying a message that would trigger the worst command crisis of the war. It was from Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. Montgomery was demanding that Major General William Simpson be removed from command of the Ninth Army immediately. Smith watched Eisenhower read the message. He saw his commander's jaw tighten, saw his hand grip the paper harder than necessary. Then Eisenhower did something Smith had rarely seen. He swore. Because this wasn't just a personnel dispute. This was a British field marshal trying to fire an American general. This was Montgomery threatening the command structure that had held the alliance together since D-Day. And if Eisenhower handled this wrong, the entire Allied coalition could collapse. Montgomery's message was formal but clear. Simpson was unsuitable for commanding an army under British operational control. His methods were incompatible with Montgomery's operational requirements. He should be replaced with a more cooperative American general. Eisenhower read the message twice to make sure he understood what Montgomery was actually asking. Then he picked up the phone and called Omar Bradley. "Brad, we have a problem." What followed would be 72 hours that nearly destroyed the Western Alliance. A confrontation between American pride and British arrogance, between coalition warfare and national interest, between Eisenhower's diplomatic genius and Montgomery's spectacular tone deafness. And at the center of it all was one American general who had done absolutely nothing wrong except refuse to be treated like a subordinate servant. To understand why Montgomery tried to fire Simpson, you need to understand the command structure in early 1945. During the Battle of the Bulge, German forces had split the American front. Montgomery's headquarters was closer to the northern sector. Eisenhower temporarily placed two American armies under Montgomery's command. The First Army under General Courtney Hodges, the Ninth Army under General William Simpson. Over 500,000 American soldiers now reporting to a British field marshal. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, just until the German offensive was stopped and the front stabilized. But Montgomery saw opportunity where Eisenhower saw necessity. By January 1945, the Bulge was over. German forces were retreating. The crisis had passed. But Montgomery wanted to keep those armies permanently. He had a plan for a massive northern offensive into Germany. British and Canadian forces alone weren't enough. He needed American strength. More specifically, he needed the Ninth Army. Simpson's army was positioned perfectly for Montgomery's planned Rhine crossing. Over 300,000 American soldiers with full equipment and strong morale. If Montgomery could keep Ninth Army, he could execute his grand strategy. Drive to the Ruhr industrial region, end the war by May. There was just one problem. General William Simpson wasn't cooperating the way Montgomery expected. Simpson was 54 years old, a Texan, West Point graduate. He had commanded Ninth Army since it arrived in Europe in September 1944. His record was excellent. His soldiers called him Big Simp with genuine affection. His staff respected him. Bradley considered him one of his best army commanders. But Simpson had one quality that Montgomery found deeply irritating. He was polite, professional, and completely unwilling to be pushed around. Montgomery's command style was direct, some would say imperial. He expected subordinates to follow his orders without question or discussion. Simpson followed orders, but he also asked questions. He offered suggestions. He pointed out problems with Montgomery's plans when he saw them. This was normal American military culture. Junior officers were expected to provide input. Commanders wanted honest assessments from their subordinates.
but Montgomery interpreted Simpson's professionalism as insubordination. The breaking point came on January 2, 1945. Montgomery's headquarters, outside Brussels. Montgomery had called a planning conference for the Rhine crossing operation. Simpson and his senior staff attended. Montgomery presented his plan. It was elaborate, detailed, and overwhelming in its complexity. Massive artillery preparation, 2 airborne divisions, engineering units constructing bridges under fire, coordinated assaults across multiple crossing points. Montgomery's strength was planning set-piece operations where nothing was left to chance. When he finished his presentation, he asked for questions. Simpson had several. First, the timeline seemed overly cautious. Why wait until late March? The Germans were retreating. Waiting gave them time to rebuild defenses. Second, the artillery preparation would alert the Germans to exactly where the crossing would occur. Wouldn't surprise be more valuable? Third, American forces under Patton were already approaching the Rhine in the south. If they crossed first, wouldn't that divert German reserves? These were reasonable tactical questions. Simpson wasn't challenging Montgomery's authority. He was doing his job as an army commander, evaluating the operational plan. Montgomery's response was cold. General Simpson, I am not interested in American opinions on operational timing. The plan has been approved. Your army will execute it as directed. Simpson nodded professionally. Of course, sir. I just wanted to ensure we've considered all factors. The factors have been considered, Montgomery said, by me. The meeting continued, but the temperature had dropped noticeably. Simpson's chief of staff later told colleagues that Montgomery had treated Simpson like a battalion commander, not an army commander. After the meeting, Montgomery spoke with his own staff. He said Simpson was difficult, that he questioned orders too much, that he wasn't the type of American general Montgomery needed for the Rhine crossing. Montgomery wanted someone more cooperative. What he really wanted was someone who would follow orders without asking questions. On January 3rd, Montgomery drafted his message to Eisenhower. Simpson should be replaced. Montgomery didn't cite any operational failures. He couldn't. Ninth Army's performance had been excellent throughout the Bulge. Instead, Montgomery used vague language about compatibility and operational requirements. What he meant was simple. Simpson won't do exactly what I tell him without discussion, and I want him gone. The message arrived at SHAEF headquarters on January 4th, and Eisenhower realized he was facing a crisis that went far beyond one personnel decision.
Eisenhower understood immediately what was at stake. If he agreed to Montgomery's demand, he would be admitting that British commanders could fire American generals for being difficult. Every American officer in Europe would learn that if you questioned a British superior, your career was over. American commanders would stop providing honest tactical assessments. They would become yes-men to avoid being removed. The precedent would poison the entire command structure. But if Eisenhower refused Montgomery's demand outright, Montgomery would likely appeal to Churchill. The issue would become political. The British would claim Americans were being uncooperative. The alliance could fracture. Eisenhower called Bradley and explained the situation. Bradley's response was immediate and volcanic. Absolutely not. Montgomery is not firing one of my generals. Bradley explained that Simpson was one of the best Army commanders in the European theater. His performance during the Bulge had been exemplary. His troops were well-trained and highly motivated. The only thing Simpson had done wrong was treat Montgomery like a fellow professional rather than royalty. If Monty wants a servant, he can hire one, Bradley said, but he's not going to turn American generals into British subordinates. Bradley made his position clear. If Eisenhower removed Simpson to satisfy Montgomery, Bradley would consider it a vote of no confidence in American commanders. Other generals would react the same way. The American command structure would revolt. Eisenhower also called Patton to get his assessment. Patton's response was characteristically blunt. Montgomery wants to fire Simpson because Simpson has a backbone. Monty can't stand American officers who won't kiss his ring. Patton added that if Eisenhower caved to this demand, every American general in Europe would lose respect for SAFE. You'd be telling us that our careers depend on making British commanders feel important rather than winning battles, Patton said. Eisenhower thanked both commanders and hung up. He sat alone in his office, thinking through the problem. He couldn't fire Simpson. The American backlash would be devastating. But he also couldn't just tell Montgomery no without offering some alternative. Montgomery was commanding 2 American armies. That was already an uncomfortable arrangement. If Montgomery felt he couldn't work with one of those army commanders, the situation would become impossible. Eisenhower needed a solution that satisfied no one but kept everyone in the war. He picked up the phone and called Montgomery's headquarters.
Montgomery took the call expecting Eisenhower to discuss Simpson's replacement. Instead, Eisenhower asked a question. "Monty, what specifically has General Simpson done wrong?" Montgomery explained that Simpson questioned operational decisions, that he didn't accept directions without debate, that he wasn't suitable for operating under British command. Eisenhower listened carefully. Then he asked another question. "Has Ninth Army failed to execute any of your orders?" Montgomery admitted they had not. "Has Simpson's army performed poorly during the Bulge?" Montgomery admitted they had performed well. "Then what you're saying is that Simpson does his job effectively, but you don't like his command style." Montgomery bristled. This wasn't about personal preference. This was about operational compatibility. Eisenhower's response was measured but firm. "Monty, I'm not going to fire an American general because he asks questions during planning meetings. That's how American commanders operate. If you want American armies, you get American command culture." Montgomery started to protest, but Eisenhower continued. "However, I recognize that command relationships need to work, so here's what I'm prepared to do." Eisenhower laid out his solution. First Army would return to Bradley's command immediately. That would reduce Montgomery's American forces from 2 armies to 1. Montgomery could keep Ninth Army temporarily for the Rhine crossing operation, but after the Rhine was crossed, Ninth Army would also return to American command. This was non-negotiable. Montgomery protested. Taking away First Army would cripple his northern offensive. He needed both armies. Eisenhower's response was direct. "You can keep Ninth Army for the Rhine crossing, or you can lose both armies right now. Your choice." Montgomery asked for time to consider. "You have 1 hour," Eisenhower said. "After that, both armies return to American command, and you plan your operations with Commonwealth forces only." Eisenhower hung up. He had just given Montgomery an ultimatum: accept the compromise or lose everything. Now he waited to see if Montgomery would blink. Montgomery's chief of staff, Major General Freddie de Gingand, was in the room during Eisenhower's call. When Montgomery hung up, de Gingand saw the field marshal's face and knew this was about to get worse. Montgomery was furious. How dare Eisenhower give him an ultimatum? How dare he reduce Montgomery's command for defending legitimate operational concerns? De Gingand asked what Eisenhower had said. Montgomery explained the offer. Give up First Army immediately. Keep Ninth Army temporarily. Accept the compromise or lose both armies. De Gingand's response was immediate. You have to accept. Montgomery turned on his chief of staff. This was a matter of principle. Simpson was unsuitable for the operation. Eisenhower was prioritizing American politics over military effectiveness. De Gingand, normally deferential to Montgomery, pushed back hard. "Sir, if you refuse this offer, you will command only British and Canadian forces for the rest of the war. Is that what you want?" Montgomery started to argue that Churchill would support him. De Gingand cut him off. "Churchill will not fight Eisenhower over this. The Americans are providing most of the troops, most of the equipment, most of the supplies. If you force Churchill to choose between you and the American alliance, you will lose." This was the brutal political reality Montgomery didn't want to face. Britain was the junior partner now. American strength was decisive. American commanders wouldn't accept British officers firing their generals. De Gingand pressed his point. "You tried to fire an American general because he asks questions during planning meetings. How do you think that looks? How do you think American commanders will react?" Montgomery argued that Simpson was insubordinate. "He's not insubordinate," De Gingand said. "He's professional. There's a difference. And if you can't tell the difference, you're going to lose this entire command." This was as close to insubordination as De Gingand had ever come, but he knew Montgomery was about to make a catastrophic mistake. Montgomery was silent for a long moment. Then he asked what De Gingand recommended. "Accept Eisenhower's offer immediately. Keep Ninth Army for the Rhine crossing. Execute the operation successfully. After that, the Army returns to American command, and you focus on leading Commonwealth forces to victory." Montgomery asked about the principle of the thing, about command authority. "The principle," De Gingand said carefully, "is that you don't have the political capital to fight this battle. Choose fights you can win." Montgomery stared at his chief of staff. Then he picked up the phone and called Eisenhower back. 37 minutes had passed since Eisenhower's ultimatum. Montgomery's call to Eisenhower was brief. He accepted the compromise. First Army would return to Bradley immediately. Ninth Army would remain under Montgomery's command for the Rhine crossing operation only. Eisenhower confirmed the terms. After the Rhine crossing, Ninth Army returns to American command. No extensions, no exceptions. Montgomery agreed. When Eisenhower hung up, Bedell Smith asked if he believed Montgomery would actually return the Army after the operation. "He'll try to keep it," Eisenhower said. "He'll find operational reasons why transferring the Army would be disruptive, but I'll be ready for that." Eisenhower immediately sent orders to Bradley. First Army, under General Courtney Hodges, was returning to 12th Army Group effective immediately. Bradley was satisfied with this part of the compromise. He got his largest army back. But he was still concerned about Montgomery keeping Ninth Army even temporarily. "He's going to use the Rhine crossing to argue for extended command," Bradley told Eisenhower. "Let him try," Eisenhower said. "After the operation succeeds, the Army returns, period." Eisenhower also sent a message to General Simpson. The message was carefully worded, but the subtext was clear. "You did nothing wrong. Montgomery tried to fire you for being a professional. I said no." Simpson's response was characteristically modest. He thanked Eisenhower for his confidence. He said he would continue to work professionally with Montgomery during the Rhine operation, and he looked forward to returning to American command afterward. No drama, no complaints, just professional acknowledgement. This was exactly why Bradley valued Simpson. The man was unflappable. The official announcements went out on January 5, 1945. First Army had returned to American command. Ninth Army would remain under Montgomery for the Rhine crossing, then return to 12th Army Group. The press reported it as a routine command adjustment. They had no idea how close the alliance had come to fracturing.
But every senior commander in Europe understood what had really happened. Montgomery had tried to fire an American general. Eisenhower had said no. Montgomery had been forced to back down. The message was clear. British commanders did not have authority to remove American officers.
The next 3 months were tense. Montgomery planned Operation Plunder, the Rhine crossing, with meticulous detail. Simpson and Ninth Army worked professionally with Montgomery's staff. They executed their assigned missions without complaint. But Montgomery's staff noticed something. Simpson remained polite and professional. He followed orders, but he no longer offered suggestions during planning meetings. He no longer asked probing questions about operational assumptions. He had learned the lesson. Montgomery didn't want subordinates who thought independently. He wanted subordinates who followed orders. Simpson gave Montgomery exactly what he wanted, nothing more. Meanwhile, on March 22, 1945, Patton's Third Army reached the Rhine near Oppenheim. Patton crossed immediately. No elaborate preparation, no massive buildup, just rapid exploitation of a weakly defended sector. Patton called Bradley with specific instructions. "Tell the world we're across. I want everyone to know Third Army crossed before Monty starts his engines." This was more than tactical opportunism. It was a message. American mobile warfare doctrine worked. The Rhine could be crossed without Montgomery's elaborate preparations. Montgomery was furious when he heard about Patton's crossing. This was reckless American showboating. But Patton had proven something important. Montgomery's complexity wasn't necessary. Operation Plunder launched on March 23rd, one day after Patton's crossing. It was massive. Over 300,000 Allied troops, enormous artillery preparation, airborne divisions, engineering miracles. And it succeeded. Montgomery's forces crossed the Rhine and established a substantial bridgehead. It was a professional, well-executed operation. But it came after Patton had already proven the river could be taken. American newspapers noted this fact with satisfaction. British newspapers emphasized the scale and complexity of Montgomery's operation. The subtext was clear. Americans valued speed and aggression. British valued planning and preparation. Neither was wrong, but they were fundamentally different approaches. After the Rhine crossing, Montgomery's staff submitted plans for advancing into northern Germany. The plans included Ninth Army forces. Montgomery argued that removing Ninth Army now would disrupt operations already underway. Eisenhower saw exactly what he had predicted. Montgomery was using operational necessity to extend his command indefinitely. On April 4, 1945, Eisenhower issued final orders. Ninth Army returns to Bradley's 12th Army Group, effective immediately, no extensions. Montgomery protested to Churchill. This would cripple his advance into northern Germany. Churchill did not intervene. The political cost of fighting this battle was too high. Britain's influence over Allied strategy had been declining since D-Day. This was the final admission. American forces would be commanded by Americans. Simpson's Ninth Army returned to American command and continued advancing into Germany under Bradley's direction. They linked up with Soviet forces at the Elbe River in late April. The army that Montgomery had desperately wanted to keep played its role in final victory under American command. The confrontation over Simpson revealed fundamental tensions in the Allied coalition. Montgomery believed his experience and rank entitled him to complete authority over subordinate commanders, regardless of nationality. American commanders believed that professional competence and honest communication were essential, regardless of who was in charge. Eisenhower understood both perspectives, but he also understood political reality. The alliance required mutual respect. British commanders couldn't treat American generals as interchangeable servants.
If Montgomery wanted American armies, he had to accept American command culture. Eisenhower's compromise was elegant. He didn't humiliate Montgomery by stripping away both armies immediately. That would have created a diplomatic crisis with Churchill. Instead, he gave Montgomery enough to save face, one army for one operation, while establishing clear boundaries. After the Rhine crossing, American armies would be commanded by Americans using American operational methods. The lesson went deeper than just command relationships. Montgomery tried to fire Simpson for asking questions, for offering professional input, for treating Montgomery like a colleague rather than a superior being. This revealed Montgomery's fundamental weakness as a coalition commander. He confused deference with effectiveness. He wanted subordinates who made him feel important rather than subordinates who helped him win battles. Simpson did both. He was respectful and professional, but he also thought independently and provided honest assessments. That's what made him valuable, and that's why Eisenhower refused to fire him. Years later, military historians studying coalition warfare would point to this incident as a case study in alliance management. Eisenhower's decision to protect Simpson while compromising on force allocation showed sophisticated political judgment. He defended the principle, American commanders won't be fired for doing their jobs professionally. But he also gave Montgomery enough operational capability to execute his Rhine crossing successfully. Nobody got everything they wanted, but everyone stayed in the war. That's coalition warfare. General William Simpson continued commanding Ninth Army through the final months of the war. His performance was exemplary. His troops advanced rapidly into Germany. They captured hundreds of thousands of prisoners. They linked up with Soviet forces as planned. After the war, Simpson received the Distinguished Service Medal for his leadership of Ninth Army. The citation praised his tactical skill, operational judgment, and professional character. There was no mention of the incident with Montgomery. The confrontation remained largely unknown outside senior command circles. But Simpson knew what had happened. Eisenhower had defended him when a British field marshal tried to end his career for being professional. In his post-war memoirs, Simpson wrote carefully about serving under Montgomery. He praised Montgomery's planning ability and organizational skill. He acknowledged learning from Montgomery's set-piece operational methods. But he also wrote one revealing sentence. I learned that coalition warfare requires not just tactical competence, but cultural understanding of how different armies approach command relationships. This was Simpson's diplomatic way of saying, Montgomery and I had fundamentally different views on what subordinate commanders should do. Montgomery never admitted that trying to fire Simpson had been a mistake. In his own memoirs, Montgomery wrote that some American commanders required more guidance than others during the Rhine crossing. This was Montgomery's way of suggesting Simpson had been difficult without actually saying it. But the historical record speaks clearly. Simpson commanded Ninth Army from September 1944 until the end of the war. His performance was consistently excellent. His removal would have been based entirely on Montgomery's personal preferences, not operational necessity. Eisenhower understood this, and he refused to let personal friction destroy professional competence. The incident also revealed something important about Eisenhower's leadership. He was willing to confront Montgomery when necessary. He didn't avoid conflict to preserve superficial harmony. But he also gave Montgomery a way to back down without public humiliation. This was sophisticated coalition management. Protect your commander's professional integrity, defend essential principles, but give allies room to adjust without losing face. Eisenhower would use these same skills later as Supreme Commander of NATO. He understood that alliances require balancing national interests with collective objectives. Sometimes that means telling a field marshal no when he tries to fire a general for asking questions. The confrontation over Simpson lasted only 72 hours, but it established a precedent that would shape Allied command relationships for the rest of the war. British commanders could not unilaterally remove American officers. Professional disagreement was not insubordination. Questions during planning meetings were not challenges to authority. And most importantly, American generals would be judged by their performance, not by whether they made British commanders feel sufficiently respected. Simpson proved that professional competence and respectful independence could coexist. Montgomery never learned that lesson. And that's why, when the history of coalition warfare is written, Simpson is remembered as a model alliance commander, while Montgomery is remembered as the field marshal who tried to fire an American general for doing his job professionally, and failed.